The Appalachian foothills of West Virginia stretched endlessly under a heavy autumn sky, the clouds low and gray, casting a muted glow over the winding road. Caleb Hart gripped the steering wheel of his battered Chevy truck, the engine humming, softly as he navigated the familiar curves home from a late shift at the garage. Beside him, his 8-year-old daughter Ellie sat in silence, her auburn curls spilling over the worn sketchbook she clutched like a lifeline. 3 years had passed since her mother's death in a car accident, and Ellie's voice had vanished with her, leaving Caleb to navigate a world of quiet grief, his heart aching for the daughter who no longer reached for his hand. The radio played a faint bluegrass tune, but Caleb barely heard it, his mind tangled in thoughts of dinner, Ellie's untouched drawings, and the hope that tonight she might look at him without turning away. The golden leaves scattered across the pavement, swirled in the truck's wake, the air heavy as if the world was holding its breath. A glint of silver caught his eye, a torn scarf fluttering like a wounded bird, snagged on a rusted mile marker. Caleb slowed, his instincts prickling, the part of him that had once been a volunteer EMT stirring, despite his exhaustion. He glanced at Ellie, who stared out the window, her expression unreadable, her fingers tracing the edge of her sketchbook. Something told him to stop, though he couldn't say why. A tug in his gut, the same one that had once pulled him into burning buildings. To save strangers, he pulled the truck to the shoulder, the gravel crunching under the tires, and stepped out into the crisp evening air, the scent of damp earth and pine sharp in his nose. The scarf, thin and shimmering, waved gently in the breeze, and beyond it, in a shallow ditch, sat a small figure, a girl no more than 7, huddled in the grass, her face streaked with mud, clutching a tattered stuffed owl with one button eye missing. Her eyes wide and steady, locked onto Caleb's with a calm that didn't match the moment, as if she'd been waiting for him specifically. He knelt before her, his knees sinking into the soft earth, his voice soft but steady. "Hey, sweetheart. Are you okay? Are you hurt?" She shook her head, her dark braids swaying, and whispered, "My brother needs help." She pointed to a thicket nearby, where branches hid a slumped form. Caleb's heart lurched as he scrambled over, pushing aside. Brambles to find a boy about 11, unconscious, his face pale, a sprained ankle swollen beneath a torn pant leg. His breathing was shallow, his skin hot with fever, a faint bruise blooming on his forehead. Caleb's training kicked in. He checked the boy's pulse, weak but steady, and noted the clammy skin, the way his thin frame seemed to carry days of hunger. He didn't hesitate. He scooped the boy into his arms, his body far too light for his age, and turned to the girl. "Come on, let's get him to my truck." She followed, clutching her owl, and climbed into the passenger seat as Caleb laid the boy across the back, careful to keep his head elevated. Ellie watched from her seat, her sketchbook forgotten, her eyes wide with something new. Curiosity, maybe hope, a flicker of the girl she used to be. Caleb slid into the driver's seat, his hands trembling slightly as he turned the key, but the engine sputtered, then died, a faint metallic smell rising from the dashboard. Panic clawed at him as he tried again. Nothing. The boy's breathing grew fainter, each shallow inhale a ticking clock. Caleb slammed his hand against the wheel, muttering, "Come on, not now." Then the girl, her voice steady despite her small frame, said, "Check the alternator cable. Mama said it's the loose one under the dash when it smells like that." Caleb stared, stunned by her calm precision, her words cutting through his rising fear. He dropped to the floorboard, flashlight trembling in his hand, and there it was, a frayed cable, barely connected, its insulation worn thin. He twisted it back into place, securing it with a zip tie from his toolbox, his fingers moving with the muscle memory of years spent fixing engines. He climbed back into the seat, holding his breath, and turned the key. The engine roared to life, a low growl that felt like a small miracle. He looked at the girl, her face illuminated by the dashboard glow, her owl tucked tightly against her chest, and whispered, "You're incredible, you know that?" She didn't reply, just held her owl closer, her eyes fixed on her brother, in the back seat. As they sped toward the cabin, Caleb's mind raced. Who were these kids, alone on a forgotten road, and how had a 7-year-old known to fix a truck? The scarf fluttered in his memory, a quiet signal of something he couldn't yet name, a call to action he hadn't expected to answer. His cabin came into view, its porch light flickering as it always had, stubborn and unbroken, casting a glow over the sagging porch. He carried the boy inside, his boots heavy on the creaky floorboards, Ellie trailing behind with her sketchbook clutched to her chest. The girl followed, her steps careful but sure, her eyes scanning the room, the chipped mugs on the counter, the faded quilt on the couch, the way Ellie lingered in the doorway. Caleb laid the boy on the couch, grabbing a damp cloth from the kitchen to cool his fevered forehead, his hands steady despite the storm of questions in his mind. He glanced at Ellie, who stood frozen, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to draw but didn't know where to start. The girl sat cross-legged on the floor, her owl in her lap, watching her brother with a quiet intensity. Caleb knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "What's your name, sweetheart?" She looked up, her eyes holding stories too heavy for her years. "Sophie," she said softly. "And he's Noah." Caleb nodded, his throat tight. "You're safe now, Sophie. We're going to take care of Noah." She didn't smile, but her shoulders eased, and for the first time in years Caleb felt the weight of a moment bigger than himself, a choice made on a roadside, a chance to be more than a man driving home. Ellie stepped closer, her sketchbook open to a blank page, and for the first time in 3 years her fingers twitched with purpose, as if she might draw again. The cabin's warmth wrapped around them like a worn blanket, the kind that's frayed but still holds you together. Caleb Hart carried Noah gently to the couch, the boy's fevered skin hot against his arms, his thin frame a reminder of days without care. The living room smelled of pine and old coffee, the flickering porch light casting shadows across the hardwood. Ellie lingered in the hallway, her sketchbook clutched tightly, her eyes darting between Sophie and the boy, a quiet curiosity replacing her usual guarded stare. Sophie sat cross-legged on the rug, her stuffed owl pressed to her chest, watching Caleb with an intensity that made him feel seen in a way he hadn't in years. He grabbed a damp cloth from the kitchen, kneeling to press it against Noah's forehead, his hands steady from years of fixing engines and bandaging scraped knees. The boy's breathing was shallow but steady, his sprained ankle propped on a cushion, the bruise on his forehead fading under the cool cloth. Caleb glanced at Sophie, her braid slightly unraveled, her face smudged with dirt but calm as if she'd learned to carry fear without letting it break her. He stood, moving to the kitchen to heat a can of chicken noodle soup, the clatter of pots a familiar rhythm that grounded him. "You hungry, Sophie?" he asked softly, and she nodded, her eyes never leaving Noah. He poured the soup into 2 mismatched bowls, slicing bread from a loaf he'd baked yesterday, and set the table with a care he hadn't felt since Ellie stopped speaking. Sophie hesitated, then climbed into a chair, her owl tucked beside her, and took a slow sip, her gaze flickering to Ellie, who hovered in the doorway. Caleb sat across from her, his own bowl untouched, watching the way Sophie noticed everything, the creak of the chair, the chipped rim of her bowl, the way Ellie's fingers twitched over her sketchbook. "You did something brave out there," he said, his voice low, "fixing the truck like that." Sophie looked down, her spoon pausing. "Mama taught me. She said you have to know things in case you're alone." The word alone hit Caleb like a stone, echoing the silence that had filled his home since his wife's death. He didn't press, sensing the weight behind her words, but asked, "What's your owl's name?" Sophie's lips curved slightly, the first hint of a smile. "Feathers." Caleb nodded, glancing at Ellie, who stepped closer, her sketchbook open to a blank page. Without a word, Ellie slid a crayon towards Sophie, a soft pink one, and Sophie took it, her fingers brushing Ellie's in a moment that felt like a bridge. They began to draw together, simple lines forming a tree, a house, a road, silent but shared, a language Caleb hadn't seen Ellie use in years. His heart clenched, a mix of hope and ache as he watched his daughter lean closer, her shoulders easing. He turned back to Noah, checking his temperature again, relieved to find it dropping. The boy's chest rose and fell more evenly now, but his thinness, the hollows under his eyes, told a story of survival Caleb couldn't yet piece together. He tucked a quilt around Noah, its faded patchwork a gift from his late wife, and felt a pang of her absence. Sophie's voice broke the quiet. "He'll wake up soon. He always does." Caleb met her gaze, seeing a trust she shouldn't have to give so easily. "You're a good sister," he said, and she shrugged, her eyes returning to her drawing. Caleb noticed a tattered backpack by Sophie's feet, its zipper half broken, a folded piece of paper peeking out. Written in neat handwriting was a name, Margaret Lane, and a phone number. His fingers hovered over it, instinct warring with caution. Who was Margaret? A friend, a relative, someone safe? Sophie's guardedness, the way she watched Noah like a sentinel, suggested they'd been running from something or someone. He slipped the paper back, deciding not to call yet, not until he knew more. The cabin's quiet was different now. Not the hollow silence of grief, but a fragile stillness, like the moment before a storm breaks or a seed sprouts. Ellie's crayon moved faster, her lines bolder, and Sophie mirrored her, their heads bent together. Caleb stood, moving to the window to check the road, half expecting headlights, a threat he couldn't name. The night was empty, save for the rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. He thought of the silver scarf, still tangled on the mile marker, a signal he'd almost missed. Sophie's voice came again, soft but clear. "Why did you stop?" Caleb turned, meeting her steady gaze. "I don't know," he admitted. "I saw the scarf, then you, and I just couldn't keep driving." She nodded as if his answer was enough and returned to her drawing. Ellie looked up, her eyes meeting Caleb's for the first time in months, not with fear, but with something softer, like recognition. He swallowed hard, the weight of the moment settling in his chest. He thought of his wife, how she'd always said kindness was a choice you made when no one was watching. The porch light flickered outside, its stubborn glow a reminder of the life he'd been trying to rebuild. Sophie set her crayon down, her drawing now a sketch of a truck with a silver scarf waving beside it, a man standing in the road. She didn't show it to Caleb, but he saw the care in her lines, the way she captured the moment that changed everything. Noah stirred, a soft groan escaping his lips, and Sophie was at his side in an instant, her small hand on his arm. Caleb knelt beside them, checking Noah's pulse, steady now, his fever easing. "He's going to be okay," Caleb said, more to himself than to Sophie. She nodded, her owl feathers tucked under her arm like a shield. Ellie stepped closer, her sketchbook open, and pointed to a blank page, offering it to Sophie. The girls exchanged a look, a silent agreement, and began to draw again, their crayons moving in tandem. Caleb watched, his throat tight, as the cabin filled with the soft scratch of crayons and the faint hum of life returning. He didn't know who Sophie and Noah were running from, or what lay ahead, but for now, they were here, safe. And Ellie was drawing again. The flickering porch light cast a warm glow through the window, and Caleb felt something shift inside him, a spark of purpose, a reason to keep going. The morning light filtered through the cabin's curtains, soft and golden, painting the hardwood in warm stripes. Caleb's heart rose early, the smell of coffee grounding him as he checked on Noah, still asleep on the couch, his breathing steadier now, the bruise on his forehead fading to a dull purple. Sophie sat nearby, her stuffed owl feathers perched on her lap, her eyes tracing the room's details, the chipped paint on the doorframe, the stack of unwashed mugs, the way Ellie's sketchbook lay open on the table, its pages filled with new drawings. Caleb poured 2 mugs of coffee, diluting one with milk for Noah when he woke, and handed Sophie a glass of orange juice, her small hands wrapping around it with care. She hadn't spoken much since last night, but her quiet wasn't empty. It was heavy with memory, with stories she wasn't ready to share. Caleb knelt beside Noah, checking his ankle, now less swollen, and felt a flicker of relief. The boy stirred, his eyelids fluttering, and mumbled, "Sophie." She was at his side in an instant, her voice soft. "I'm here. You're okay." Noah's eyes opened, hazy but alert, and he nodded, his gaze shifting to Caleb, wary but not afraid. Caleb offered a gentle smile. "You're in my cabin, Noah. You're safe." Noah didn't reply, but his shoulders eased, and he reached for Sophie's hand, a silent anchor. Caleb moved to the kitchen, starting breakfast, pancakes, something simple to fill the air with warmth. As the batter sizzled, Sophie spoke, her voice steady. "Mama taught us to watch everything. She said details keep you alive." Caleb paused, spatula in hand, the weight of her words settling like dust. "What's your mama's name?" he asked, keeping his tone light. "Clara," Sophie said, her eyes dropping to feathers. "She's gone now." Caleb's chest tightened, the echo of his own loss sharp. He glanced at Ellie, who sat at the table, her crayon hovering over a drawing of a tree, her expression soft but focused. He didn't press Sophie further, but her words lingered, a thread to a past he needed to understand. After breakfast, Noah sat up, sipping water, his voice raspy but clear. "We were at a big house before, with gates. They didn't want Mama there." Sophie nodded, adding, "It had a tree house. Mama called it our safe spot, where we could hide if we needed to." Caleb listened, piecing together fragments. A grand estate, a mother on the run, children taught to survive. He thought of the note in Sophie's backpack, Margaret Lane's name and number, and decided it was time. While the kids ate, he stepped onto the porch, the autumn air crisp, and dialed the number on his old rotary phone. A woman answered, her voice calm but sharp. "Margaret Lane." Caleb cleared his throat. "I'm Caleb Hart. I found 2 kids. On a road near Pine Hollow, Sophie and Noah. Your number was in Sophie's bag." A pause, heavy with meaning. Then Margaret's voice softened. "Are they safe?" Caleb assured her they were, explaining the roadside rescue, Noah's condition, Sophie's quick thinking. Margaret exhaled. "Clara, their mother, was my client. She left them to someone who'd stop for kindness, not duty." "Sounds like that's you." Caleb's throat tightened, the responsibility both heavy and humbling. Margaret promised to visit tomorrow with documents, but warned him. The Warren family, Clara's in-laws, were powerful, with deep roots in the county's courts, and they'd want the kids back for their inheritance. Caleb hung up, his mind racing, and returned inside to find Sophie showing Ellie a drawing, a treehouse with a rope ladder, its branches heavy with leaves. "That's where Mama read to us," Sophie said, her voice soft but clear. Ellie pointed to the page, then drew a small figure beside the treehouse, a girl with auburn curls. Caleb's heart stopped. Ellie was drawing herself into Sophie's world. He sat beside them, his voice gentle. "That's beautiful, Sophie. What was Clara like?" Sophie's eyes lit up, a rare spark. "She was brave. She taught me how to fix things like the truck and how to remember everything like the sound of her singing." Noah looked up, his voice quiet. "She got sick. She told us to keep going, to find someone good." Caleb nodded, his own grief mirrored in their words. He thought of his wife, her laughter, her belief that kindness was a light in the dark. Later he opened his laptop, its screen flickering, and searched Clara Warren. Articles appeared. Society, pages, charity events, then a sudden drop-off 5 years ago. A photo showed Clara, elegant but worn, her eyes like Sophie's, her arm around 2 small children. The Warrens were old money, their name tied to land deals and whispered scandals. Clara's disappearance was noted as erratic, but Caleb saw the truth, a mother shielding her children from a family that saw them as assets. He closed the laptop, his resolve hardening. Sophie approached, holding a new drawing, a truck, a silver scarf, a man standing in the road. "This is you," she said, her voice steady. "Mama said someone would stop." Caleb swallowed, his fingers brushing the paper. "I'm glad it was me." Ellie looked up, her crayon pausing, and whispered, "Me too." The word, her first in years, hit Caleb like a wave, tears prickling his eyes. He pulled her close, her small frame warm against him, and Sophie joined, her owl tucked between them. The cabin felt alive, its silence replaced by the soft scratch of crayons, Noah's steady breathing, and the flicker of the porch light outside. Caleb knew the Warrens would come, their wealth a looming shadow. But for now, the kids were here. Ellie was speaking, and he was no longer just a man surviving loss. He was a protector, chosen by a mother's faith, and he wouldn't let go. The cabin hummed with a new rhythm over the next week, its creaky floors and flickering porch light bearing witness to a fragile but growing sense of home. Caleb Hart watched Sophie and Noah settle into the space, their guarded edges softening as they filled the air with small sounds. Sophie's humming, Noah's quiet footsteps, the scratch of Ellie's crayons finding purpose again. Sophie taught Ellie to braid grass into bracelets, their fingers weaving patterns by the fireplace, while Noah helped Caleb repair a sagging porch step, his hands steady as he drove nails with a focus that mirrored Clara's lessons about fixing things to fix yourself. Caleb marveled at Sophie's sharp memory. She noted where the sugar jar sat, the exact squeak of the third stair, the way Ellie paused before taking a bite, as if savoring the safety of a full plate. Noah, stronger now, his ankle healing, spoke, sparingly but watched everything, his eyes carrying a weight no 11-year-old should bear. One morning, as rain pattered on the tin roof, Sophie pulled a notebook from her backpack, its pages worn but filled with sketches, a treehouse, a woman, with kind eyes, a road stretching into the distance. She showed Ellie, who added a flower to the corner, her first bold stroke in years, and Caleb's heart swelled, hearing Ellie hum a tune his wife once sang. Over dinner, spaghetti, Sophie's choice, the kids laughed when Noah's fork slipped, sauce splattering his chin, and Ellie giggled, a sound so rare Caleb froze, his fork mid-air. She whispered, "Home," pointing to her plate, and Caleb blinked back tears, the word a bridge across 3 silent years. Noah caught his eye, offering a nod, a silent acknowledgement of shared survival. Later, Caleb found Sophie taping a drawing. To the porch post, a truck, a silver scarf, a man stopping on a road captioned, "We're home now," in careful letters. The image, simple but precise, anchored Caleb's resolve, a testament to the moment that changed them all. He thought of Margaret Lane's warning about the Warrens, their wealth and influence a looming threat, and felt a fierce protectiveness flare in his chest. When Margaret arrived the next day, her boots crunching on the gravel drive, she carried a folder thick with documents, Clara's notarized letter, custody instructions, evidence of the Warrens' financial schemes that drove Clara to run. She sat with Caleb on the porch, the kids inside playing a board game, Ellie's laughter mingling with Sophie's. "The Warrens want the kids back," Margaret said, her voice steady but grave. "They're heirs to a trust fund, and the family won't let that go without a fight. They've got lawyers, connections, judges in their pocket." Caleb's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the drawing on the post. "They're not taking them, not after what Clara did to keep them free." Margaret nodded, her eyes softening. "Clara believed in someone like you, a person who'd stop for no reason but kindness. You're proving her right." She outlined the plan, a court hearing in a week, testimony from a child psychologist, statements from the kids if they chose to speak. Caleb listened, his mind racing, but his heart was with the kids inside, their voices a reminder of what he was fighting for. That afternoon, Noah joined Caleb in the backyard, inspecting an old shed Caleb hadn't touched in years. "We could fix it," Noah said, tapping the frame. "For tools or maybe chickens." Caleb chuckled, handing him a hammer. "Your mama teach you that?" Noah nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "She said fixing things keeps you steady." They worked together, replacing rotted boards, the rhythm of their hammers a quiet bond. Sophie and Ellie appeared, Sophie carrying a can of paint. "For the chickens," she said solemnly. "They like warm colors." Caleb didn't question it, just handed her a brush and watched as the girls painted the shed red, their laughter bright against the gray sky. That evening, Caleb sat with Sophie on the porch, the stars peeking through the clouds. She leaned against him, feathers in her lap, and asked, "Do you look at the stars because of your wife?" Caleb nodded, surprised. "She said they're bigger than our problems." Sophie looked up, her voice soft. "Mama said the stars are where you talk to people who've changed places." Caleb's throat tightened, thinking of Clara, of his wife, of 2 kids who'd lost everything but still carried hope. He pulled Sophie close, her small frame warm against him, and Ellie joined them, her sketchbook open to a new drawing, a porch with 3 figures under a glowing light. "That's us," Ellie whispered, her second sentence in years, and Caleb felt the world tilt back into place. The Warrens' shadow loomed, their wealth a cold threat. But the cabin was alive with warmth. Pancakes on the table, a shed painted. Red, a girl finding her voice. Caleb knew the fight was coming, but for now he held the kids close, their trust a weight he was proud to carry. The porch light flickered, then held steady, as if it too had found its reason to stay on. The air turned sharp the morning the Warrens' lawyers arrived, a subtle shift in the West Virginia breeze that rattled the wind chimes and set the porch swing creaking. Caleb Hart stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee, when the sleek black SUV pulled into the gravel drive, its polished shine stark against the cabin's weathered wood. Sophie and Noah sat at the table sharing a plate of toast, while Ellie drew nearby, her crayons scratching softly. Caleb's heart thudded as he stepped onto the porch, the silver scarf drawing still taped to the post, its caption, "We're home now," a quiet defiance. Margaret Lane joined him, her jacket zipped, legal folder in hand, her eyes steady but fierce. The SUV door opened, and a man in a tailored suit emerged, his smile thin and practiced, followed by a woman in sharp heels, her tablet glowing with notes. "Daniel Reed, representing the Warren estate," the man said, his voice smooth as ice. Margaret stepped forward, her tone calm but cutting. "Margaret Lane, counsel for Sophie and Noah. You're early and without court approval." Reed's smile didn't waver. "We'd prefer to avoid court. The children belong with family in a stable environment, not a mechanic's cabin." Caleb crossed his arms, his voice even. "They're stable here. They're loved." The woman glanced at her tablet, her tone clipped. "Mr. Hart, you're a single father with no legal ties to the children. The Warrens offer resources, education, a legacy." Margaret raised an eyebrow, her folder open. "A legacy of what?" "Financial misconduct. Clara fled to protect them from your client's control. I have her notarized letter, bank records, her testimony about threats to declare her unfit." Reed's jaw tightened, but he pressed on. "The children are heirs to a trust. They need proper guardianship." Caleb stepped closer, his voice low. "They need kindness, not control. They've had enough of people who see them as property." The screen door creaked and Sophie appeared barefoot, feathers clutched to her chest, her small frame dwarfed by the suited figures. Her voice was clear, unwavering. "I want to stay. Mama said the person who stops for no reason is the one you trust." He stopped. Noah joined her, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes steady despite his fading bruises. "He fixed more than our truck. He fixed us." Caleb's throat tightened, pride and fear mingling as the kids stood tall. Ellie peeked out, her sketchbook open, her eyes wide but unafraid. Margaret turned to Reed, her voice razor-sharp. "You heard them. I have Clara's letter, a psychologist's report on their emotional stability here, and their own words. The Warrens drove their mother into hiding. You're not here for their well-being, you're here for their inheritance." Reed's smile faltered, the woman shifting uncomfortably. "The court will decide," he said, his tone clipped. Margaret nodded, unflinching. "They will. And I'll be there with every document, every statement, every truth Clara left behind. You won't win this." The lawyers retreated, their SUV disappearing down the drive, leaving a tense silence. Caleb turned to Sophie and Noah, kneeling to meet their eyes. "You okay?" Sophie nodded, her voice soft. "They made it sound like we're lucky to be theirs, but we're lucky because we're here." Noah's gaze held steady, a flicker of trust in his eyes. Caleb pulled them into a hug, Ellie joining, her small hand brushing Sophie's. Margaret leaned on the porch railing, her voice low. "They're incredible kids. Clara would be proud." Caleb nodded, his eyes on the drawing taped to the post. They changed everything. Inside, the kids returned to their drawings, Ellie sketching a porch light glowing bright, Sophie adding a figure holding feathers. Noah sat nearby, reading, his shoulders less hunched. Caleb felt the weight of the coming court battle, but the cabin's warmth, the smell of toast, the scratch of crayons, Ellie's soft hum, grounded him. Margaret stayed for coffee, outlining the hearing strategy, her presence a steady anchor. As the sun dipped low, Caleb stepped outside, the porch light flickering, then holding steady, its glow a promise. Sophie joined him, her voice small. Will they come back? Caleb nodded. Maybe, but we'll be ready. She leaned against him, feathers in her arms, and pointed to the stars. Mama's watching, isn't she? Caleb squeezed her shoulder, his voice soft. I think she knew you'd find a home. The cabin glowed behind them, alive with the laughter of 3 kids, a family forged not by blood, but by choice, ready to face whatever came next. The first true morning of spring arrived quietly, the West Virginia air carrying a gentle warmth that smelled of damp earth and budding trees. Caleb's heart woke early, the cabin alive with the soft clatter of dishes as Noah set the table, his movements, careful but sure, the bruises on his face now faint shadows. Sophie hummed a tune in the kitchen, flipping pancakes with a precision that made Caleb smile, while Ellie trailed behind, her sketchbook tucked under one arm, a bowl of strawberries in the other. The porch light glowed steady outside, its flicker gone as if it had finally decided to stay. Caleb poured coffee, sliding a mug to Noah, half milk as promised, and caught the boy's faint smirk, a sign of trust earned. The kids settled at the table, Ellie whispering thank you as she took a pancake, her third sentence in years, each word a small miracle that tightened Caleb's throat. The court hearing loomed, set for the next day, but the cabin felt like a fortress of warmth, its walls holding laughter, crayon scratches, and the scent of maple syrup. Margaret Lane arrived at noon, her SUV crunching gravel, her arms full of legal documents and a quiet confidence. She sat with the kids, explaining the hearing in gentle terms, assuring them their voices mattered. Sophie clutched Feathers, her owl, and asked, "Can I tell the judge about the treehouse?" Margaret nodded, her eyes soft. "Tell them everything." "Sweetheart," Noah leaned forward, his voice steady. "I want to say we're safe here." Caleb watched, pride swelling, as Ellie drew a picture of the cabin, its porch light glowing, captioned, "This is where we stay." The hearing came, the courtroom small and unassuming, its wood-paneled walls and humming lights more like a library than a battleground. Margaret stood tall in a navy suit, presenting Clara's letter, Sophie's drawings, and a psychologist's report detailing the kids' newfound stability. The Warren lawyers, polished and cold, spoke of wealth, legacy, and stability, their words hollow against the truth. Sophie took the stand, her voice clear despite her small frame. "Mama said the person who stops for no reason is the one you trust." Caleb stopped. He fixed our truck, our shed, our hearts. "This is the first place I felt safe." Noah followed, his words simple. "He's not just a mechanic, he's home." Ellie, too shy to speak, handed the judge her drawing, the porch light glowing under the words, "Family Stays." The judge, his eyes kind, ruled for Caleb, granting permanent guardianship, the gavels fall a quiet thunder. The Warrens' lawyers left in silence, their influence broken by truth. Back at the cabin, Caleb built a bonfire in the yard, the kids roasting, apples, their laughter bright against the dusk. Sophie tugged Caleb's sleeve, whispering, "Can we go back to the road?" He knew what she meant. They drove to the spot where it began, the sun low, painting the hills gold. Sophie stepped out, kneeling by the ditch, and placed a folded, silver ribbon in the grass, her voice soft. "Thank you, Mama." Caleb joined her, his hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to leave anything behind," he said. She smiled, her eyes bright. "I'm not. I'm saying we're home." On the drive back, Sophie looked out the window, then spoke, her voice a whisper. "Mama said good people don't disappear. They change places." Caleb squeezed her hand, the cabin coming into view, its porch light steady, laughter spilling, from the yard where Noah and Ellie chased fireflies. Margaret waited on the porch, 2 mugs of cider in hand, her smile warm as she handed one to Caleb. Their fingers brushed, a quiet promise of something new, something lasting. Inside, Ellie's drawings lined the walls, treehouses, trucks, a family under a glowing light. Noah helped clear the table, his shoulders straight, no longer carrying the weight of fear. Caleb stood on the porch watching the stars, Sophie beside him, Feathers in her arms. "Do you think Mama knows?" she asked. Caleb nodded, his voice soft. "She knew when she wrote that letter. She's right here. The cabin glowed, a home built by choice, by kindness, by a man who stopped and stayed. Margaret joined them, her shoulder brushing Caleb's, and they stood together, the night alive with the hum of crickets and the laughter of 3 kids who'd found their place. The porch light held steady, its glow a beacon, proof that sometimes, in a broken world, love begins with a single quiet choice.